In this video, we will be making this Instagram filter. This filter will show you how to use a LUT to make a video grayscale, an introduction to sign distance field, aka SCF to make the square, and add user interaction with a screen tap. So before we get into Spark AR, we have to actually make one asset in Photoshop, which is a color LUT, or a color lookup table. LUT is basically a shortcut for a computer to understand what colors map to a different color instead. Spark AR wants the color lookup table in this format, which I'll export as a PNG, and I'll also include it in the description below so you can download and use it as well. To make the actual edits, what I like to do is use a bunch of stock photos from Unsplash and make edits on top of that so that way I can see what the edits will actually do. In this case, I'm making a black and white photo, so I'll just add a black and white adjustment and then also adjust some of the levels to make the desired effect I want. Before I export, I'm going to turn off my stock photos and my background. It looks like a blank image, but all the data is actually in there. As long as I go to File, Export Color Lookup Tables. And once I click this, I'll make sure that it's on Cube. And then I will hit OK and save it somewhere I can find again so I can use it for my next step. And then I go back to the base PNG. I'll go to color lookup tables on adjustments, find that Q file, and apply it. This will make my color lookup table for that black and white image that I wanted. And then in here, I will finally file and export as PNG. And this is what I'll use in Spark AR. So in Spark AR, I can create a blank project or a different experience. In this case, I am going to create a sharing experience. So I'll click here and it'll open a blank project. Let me expand this and then go and create our space that we're going to work in. In order to do that, I'm going to right-click camera here and then go to canvas, which is where you'll work in for a 2D space. And then in here, I'll right-click and create a rectangle. I treat this similar to a layer in Photoshop. In this case, I'll make a rectangle, aka a square, in the top left as a fixed 100 by 100. Let's work in relative, which is a percentage of the screen size. If I click the box, I can quickly fill width and fill height to the full size. In here, I can create a material in the assets, or to make it really quick for myself, I can just click material in the properties panel. This will make that material on the bottom left from the assets and also apply it to the rectangle here as well. I'm going to do a quick rename of all the assets to be organized. What you can notice as well is that the rectangle is a gray box. This is because if the material is just essentially a solid color, if I turn it visible and invisible, you can see the camera texture below, which is what we actually want. We're going to make this in Patch Editor. So you can technically go to View Patch Editor itself and show it. I'm going to X this out here just because I'm going to show how I am going to open it really quickly, which I go to Materials and then click the arrow next to Texture. This opens the patch editor and also creates a patch for my texture, which is shown here. Let me zoom in so that way you can actually see here. So in order to grab the camera texture, I'm going to actually go to Camera. There's other segmentations you can pull, which you can get the hair, the face, but in this case, we're going to just make our camera texture. So if I click plus, you can see under the assets that it's pops up right there. If I click and drag it into the asset manager and then drag the arrow to the material, we should see our camera back. So that's great. Now we can apply the LUT. So you can technically add the asset by clicking the plus in the assets and then importing it from the computer, or if you have a second monitor, you can just drag it into the assets here. And then I like to change all the compression to none. I forgot why, but that's what I've been recommended to do. And then I'll go to my assets and then drag it into the patch editor. Now we need a step in between to connect the LUT to the camera texture. Luckily, there are smarter people out there, and Spark AR has a library of different patches. So I am going to look up LUT and find my patch that I want to make my LUT instead. I like this Fast Color LUT by Josh Beckwith. So I'm going to import and I'll drag it from the assets into the patch editor. And then luckily it's really well labeled, so I'll drag texture to texture and LUT to LUT. And then the final to the material as well. And now you can see that our video feed is black and white. With that, we can make the square. You can technically go and click your materials here and make an alpha and import like a Photoshop file where it's a square, but it's going to make the user interaction step harder. Instead, we'll use an SDF, in this case an SDF rectangle, because a square is a rectangle. So if I right click patch editor, you can add that patch in here as well. So let me drag this into a example rectangle and example material so that you can see. So let me just quickly do that here. You're not going to see anything as I drag this in here. So I have to add a mid step, which is a mix, and assign color values to the SDF. I just chose a random orange color here and then click OK. And then I'm going to drag this mix back to my material. Let me make the rectangle a bit bigger so you can actually see it. So fill width, fill height. And you're actually going to only see a black screen because the half size is 0.5. If I double that, that's 1 or 100%. So it'll fill up the 100% of the rectangle, or in this case, our screen. If I adjust this to 0.3 and 0.3, it'll be 60% of the screen in both directions. You can see a light gray gradient here. Let me just make the alpha a little bit more clear and you can see the effect better. It's a gradient still, so in order to make a rectangle that's more solid, I'm going to add a step in between, which is a step function, step to step, and then drag that into mix. And now you can see that it's a solid rectangle shape. It's a rectangle because the screen is a rectangle. If I change this to fix and make this an actual square for this shape, then now our SDF rectangle is a square itself. I still want to use relative, so we're going to have to do some math to make that rectangle a square and use screen size. I'm going to drag device into the patch editor and it'll make an object where it'll show the object, the screen size, and the screen scale. Different devices have different scales, so I'm going to have to divide the screen size, which is a vector 2 because screen size is an area, by the screen scale. And then we'll do some math right here quickly by then dragging this and then unpacking this because we need the ratio of the x and the y. It's a vector 2. This lets you have the individual x and y's by using this unpack patch, and then divide those into that ratio. And then to make it easier for ourselves, what we'll do is instead of just typing 0.3, I'll add a value and just make this my input for those two values. And then continuing that formula here, I'll multiply 0.3 by that ratio. And then now to make back that vector 2, instead of unpack in this case, what you'll use is a pack. But let me just really quickly organize myself here. So dragging that to a pack, and then my x will be that 0.3 value, changing this back to a vector 2, and then plugging that into my half size. It'll still be a rectangle because I didn't set my rectangle in my canvas to be the screen size itself, so it's not actually doing the correct calculation. So I'll change this back to relative to 100 to 100, and now you can see that it is back to a square. The next step is to assign the shape as an alpha shape. To do that, I'm going to go back to the patch asset library and search alpha. I found easy segmentation by Kevin Cripper to be exactly what I need. So I'm going to download that. And then I accidentally actually downloaded it twice. I'm going to delete the old one and drag that in here. And now I'm going to assign the square to my alpha, delete the extraneous patches, and delete the old examples. The final output is actually going to be my final material. So I'll quickly drag everything that I made before into here, and then I'll assign the foreground and background to the black and white versions. And by just dragging what we made before in here. And then for this color square, we'll just use the camera texture as well. So now you can see black and white in the background and the camera texture is here. This is an okay effect, but if I want to simulate touch, what I want to do is actually move the square wherever I tap. So I'll add a screen tap by right-clicking the patch header and adding screen tap. It has a 2D position and also a gesture state. The 2D position is where you currently tap. And then what I want to do is change the center, which is the square, to be wherever I tap. So if I drag this into just a unpack so you can see that it is a 2D space where I tap. And then to get that 0.5, that's a ratio of where it is in that rectangle. So I'm going to go back to my device and use screen size to calculate this percentage. So just quickly divide those two with a vector 2 division and then drag that into my center, and you can see the square move to where I previously tapped. And if I keep tapping, you can see that it is moving to where it is. The issue is if I stop it and play it, it's going to actually reset to the top left at 0, 0. You can see that it's 0, 0 here because I actually didn't screen tap. So once I screen tap though, then it is fixed. So what I'm going to do is quickly make a switch that sets the default to be the center. Otherwise, it wants to be whatever I screen tap. So the off is going to turn off when I screen tap. Otherwise, it's going to be on initially. So in order to do that, I'll drag this switch to a if-then statement. You can change this to a vector 2, the default 0.5, 0.5. Otherwise, it should use the screen tap position and drag that instead to the center itself. And now you can see that if I stop and restart, it'll start in the middle again. But if I tap, then it'll use the else statement and use where I screen tapped. You can stop here, or you can also just add more color in where I just use the camera texture. I can add different LUTs to it instead. So I'm just going to test a couple here, change these all to none, drag that in here, and then just play around and see what I like. So there's this version, or I can try this, or the virus, which I believe was the one I ended up with. Let me delete the ones I didn't actually use. And then what I like to do before I publish is to go in here and test out different devices. You never know if for some reason it doesn't work on the iPad. If people use the iPad for their filters, click around, and then when you're done, on the bottom right you can see publish, and you can publish it. And then that's our video.